Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this evening. We're back with part three. Tonight is the last part in our series. We have Duke, our guest speaker, who will be showing us what it takes to apply for a grant and be successful. If you missed part two and part one, it is posted to our YouTube channel, and you can go there to review that. Thank you for joining this evening. I'm going to go on mute and I will have Duke take the presentation away.
All right, let me share my screen here. Oh, hold on. I have to do this. All right. Is that, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can see your screen. It looks great. You can go and present our slideshow.
Very good. All right. So this is the second part of the presentation of the workshop that I started yesterday. Here we're going to be looking at what it takes to actually win grants, how to write proposals, how to design projects to suit the proposals. We're going to be going over some pretty broad strokes here because this is something that I wanted to make generalizable so that you can understand it. But there are, every funding opportunity has pretty unique specifications. So I wanted to make sure this was going to be applicable to any opportunity that you might find. Looking at the process that we were talking about yesterday, we covered 1 and 2 yesterday. Today we're going to cover number 3, which is proposal writing. And those sub bullets, we're going to get into a little bit more than that in the presentation here. But let's just sort of jump into it. The do's and don'ts for proposal writers. I wanted to give you this sort of broad overview of just do's and don'ts for any proposal that you're writing, particularly one for a government grant, but this applies for a foundation grant as well. Do regurgitate language from a detailed funding opportunity, a detailed NOFO. If they put in there, you'll see there are 2 types of NOFOs. Some of them will say, we want you to do a project. We have $100,000. We want you to do a project to empower women through education. If that's the goal, then you can do a lot of stuff. That means use your own creativity, design a program that suits your organization, that it meets their goal. Use your own language for that. Don't worry about what they're talking about. Just make sure it hits their objective. If the NOFO says, we want to empower women through education by making tertiary education accessible to single mothers. If they go through a very detailed, some of these will have 2 pages telling you exactly what you're going to do if you win this proposal. If they lay it out like that, then you're going to have to use a lot of that language and throw them back at it. Then they're basically asking you, did you understand what we told you to do? Did you understand what we need? And can you prove that you can do it? So these are 2 types of opportunities. They don't like mark them as this is type 1 and this is type 2, but that's just basically what you're going to find. If somebody's very specific, they're going to want to see those elements in your proposal highlighted. Do include marginalized populations in the design of your project. It's very important in the design of your project. Design your projects to include populations that might be marginalized. Now, a marginalized population can be a number of different groups. They could be referring to women as a marginalized population. In some societies, they're marginalized. Youth could be a marginalized population. People who are poorer than other people in the community, they could be marginalized. It could be ethnic minorities could be marginalized. It could be survivors of trauma are marginalized. Whatever the marginalized community is that's applicable to your project, make sure you design that project with them in mind. Don't exclude marginalized groups, but as importantly, don't assume that people will be able to participate if you haven't made special accommodations for marginalized groups. Also, don't include marginalized groups as an add-in after you've designed the whole project. After you've written the whole proposal, throw in oh, I'm going to do a module that's going to include women, so we can say this is inclusive of women. Reviewers will see that. Reviewers will see that this does not really fit into your project, and you won't be very competitive if you do that. So make sure that it's in the design of your project. Do build a proposal team with one leader. Maybe you're the only person that's going to be writing it. Maybe it's going to be a team, but it needs to have a clear leader, because it's one proposal for one funder for one project. It has to have one leader, because somebody has to be on the hook for everything that you're going to be submitting. Don't have a team of equals writing the proposal, because that's a bad time for democracy when you're trying to put one document together that's going to be very important. It's good to have a clear leadership. Do include local partners at the early stages of proposal development. This is where you get insight into the problem that you're trying to solve, what's feasible, what is not feasible. Include them up front, get buy-in from local partners up front, so that they're a part of the proposal development, the project development. Even if they're not writing part of the proposal, you just want to make sure that you're basing your project off of what you're hearing from them, and what the objectives are, what the donor is asking you to do. Don't send them a proposal with 2 days to go that you need to get back, which is just like, take it or leave it. Either you can do this project or we'll find somebody else. That's a bad practice. It's a bad way to get something done. Now, there will be some cases where maybe you heard about the grant opportunity late, and you have to do that. You have to send it to them and say, hey, look, we don't have any time. This is what we got. But it's always better to include them early on. Do draft specific and detailed language about the things you know about. Don't draft specific language based on speculation. Refer to a gap analysis or a needs assessment. Now, what I mean by that is that if you are doing a project to improve water access, or people's access to clean water, if you know the area very well and you know what's going on that week, that month that you're writing the proposal, maybe then you can say, we're going to fix this pipe, we're going to connect this irrigation system to the public water. Then you can be very specific if you know what's happening. But it's okay if you don't. If you are trying to speculate, don't say we're going to do X, Y, and Z if you're not absolutely sure X, Y, and Z is needed, because it's okay to put in a proposal that we're going to do a needs assessment. We're going to go there and take a look at it. They want to see that you're doing unique research for that specific grant opportunity, because they want to make sure that it's a very fluid situation on the ground in Tigray. They want to make sure that your program is going to have the best impact. So feel free to say, this is going to be contingent on a needs assessment performed on the ground in stage 1 when you're talking about the activities you're going to do. So let's talk about proposal design. I don't know why I thought this would roll off the tongue, because it really doesn't, but a proposal should be clean, lean, and clear. Clean means no typos, uniform spelling on everything. If you spell something one way, you got to keep that throughout the entire grant. That's something that people mess up all the time, and it stands out, it looks bad, and it hurts readership. And sometimes it can actually cause confusion, because sometimes you'll put 2 words together or you'll stretch them apart, and it confuses people. When they say they want 5 pages or 10 pages, what they mean is they want 10 pages in their format with their spacing, the spacing that they told you, their font size, their specific font. A lot of times people will write a proposal in the font that they like, and then at the end, they'll try to convert it into the font that the donor wants, and they'll see that font happens to space out a little bit differently than the other font, and you're a page and a half over, and now you got to cut a page and a half at the last second. It's a nightmare. So make sure that you're doing this based on their specification, their formatting. Standardize content that are written by partners. Sometimes you'll have a project where a local partner will be doing a workshop, and you'll ask that local partner, do me a favor and write up what this workshop's going to look like and send it to us. We'll include it in a proposal. In those situations, you have to make sure that you take their language, what they've written, and you make it you ensure that there's continuity between what you've written and what they're written, so it doesn't just look, too disjointed. All of this is to make it easier to read. A lot of proposals that don't get funded don't get read all the way through because the reviewer just taps out at some point and says, I can't read any more of this. So you have to make it readable. The reviewers, these people have to read 20, 30 proposals, long proposals, make it easy on their eyes, make it something that they can follow. Lean, in this case, means that the language and the description should be comprehensive but concise. You want to give all the information that they're going to need for the program, but don't go off on a tangent. Don't over explain. Make it concise. Make it something that is not going to be laborious to read. Every component of the project should be connected to the stated objectives of the project, which is usually what the donor tells you the objectives are going to be. Don't have a lot of dead end efforts where you're going to have a training program at week 2 or month 2, and it's a 2-year project and you're not doing anything else with this group that you've trained. Try to make everything flow into the next phase or the next part of your program, the next stage. Design projects to be replicable if that's what you're doing. So in some cases, of course, there's some projects that aren't going to be replicated. But if you do something that's going to, build local capacity in Shiraro, then they might need that in Ottawa too. Make sure that your programs are something that can be replicated without a lot of extra work and everything. Clarity is very, very important. The one thing that, if you take away anything from this, proposals have to make sense. You have to be able to explain it to a child and have them understand it. The reviewer may not know the details of what's happening in Tigray. They may not be an expert on the theme that your proposal is addressing. So you have to make sure that it's something that just a reasonably intelligent kid can understand. Because if not, it's going to be very difficult for them to read. It's going to be difficult to evaluate. Avoid what they call buffet projects. That's when you have a design where you're just throwing everything at them. They're going to be trained. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. They're going to do this. And you have them doing so many different things. And the reviewer looks at it and thinks, they're not going to need all of these things. Everybody's not going to need all of these things. Why am I funding a component of this project that not everybody's going to need? They're going to look at that as being wasteful. You want to make sure that if you have 12 elements in your training program or in your community project, that all of those 12 elements make sense, that you have to be able to explain why you needed 12 and not 11. So those are just basic guidelines that you want to do when you're designing your proposal. The structure, we're going to look at these are basic concepts in the proposal structure. There is no single format as we said a couple of times. The challenge is to make sure that you're putting together a coherent proposal based on the donor's preferred format. Regardless of how they ask you to write it, make sure it makes sense. Even if it's like a foundation where they have text box that they want you to fill in, you might be filling in 5 different text box. Put that in a single Word document to ensure that when they read it, because they'll usually be reading the answers as a document, make sure that the answers make sense from one to the next, to the next, to the next, that you're not, because you'll change something of one answer and then you'll forget that this also has implications for something down the road. Use one document, write one document. Something that helps me, that may help you, may or may not, but it might help you, is to use page breaks in between sections of your proposal, just so you can understand if you're going way too long on one section and you're not explaining enough in another, just so you can have a little bit of symmetry, helps the reader follow and everything. It's just a good practice if that's what you need. Some people can just write it all the way through it. I'm envious of those people. But let's look at this. This is from a proposal that was funded that it had to do with countering violent extremism. I don't think this is going to be a proposal for Tigray, but this is an example, and it's in a packet that I'm still putting together. I need 1 or 2 more documents, but it'll be out soon. But you look at the objectives and goals. It's good to put these up front. Sometimes they make you put them up front, but it's good to put these up front so these can be anchors for every element of your program has to point to these objectives, these project objectives. The objectives relate to the goals. The goals are the big picture things that the donor wants to see happen. The objective of your project is going to lead in to the goals. Now, this presentation will be available after we're done here, so you can look at this in a little bit more detail. The reason why you have words like location and X's is because I had to take a proposal and strip out anything that was going to be identifiable. So this just shows how you can have objectives, how they lead into goals, and how this is a good practice to have right up front, right in the beginning of your proposal, so that people know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Let's look at phasing and stage descriptions. This is for a 1-year project. A 1-year project had almost a page-long work plan. You want to make sure that it's clear, that it can be understood, and that it's comprehensive in the work plan, that you're identifying who's leading the role, who's leading the activity. Sometimes you want to have actually a lead role and a supporting role so you can show which organization is taking part in what activity. Then when you go to describe it, you see how I've done this is stage 1 is planning. It's a 2-month stage. There's a description here. There's some of the language talks about what they're going to be doing. Then what I used in this case was project meetings that were going to happen every couple of weeks. To where I put to the subject of the meeting, what the meeting was going to be about, and what the outputs of the meeting were. You don't really need to list every meeting that you're going to have and the subject and the outputs of every meeting that you're going to have. But in this case, it was useful to keep the reader understanding where you were in the project, what's happening, and what they can expect to see as an output at this stage. Sometimes these things are put in there just so that the reader can follow, so it doesn't, and the rest of the stages kind of went like this, and also had this box to sort of keep track of where they were in the proposal. With partnerships, it's basic common sense. You want to form a partnership early in the process, get MOUs prior to even writing the proposal. Before you even go for a proposal, it'd be good practice to have MOUs with local organizations. You can amend them if you win a grant to specify what they're talking about, but just so you can say that you have partners on the ground that you work with that are willing to work with you, so you have that understanding. This helps build capacity with local partners, and that contributes to sustainability. That's something they like to see. It also helps build your capacity so that you can serve the people that you're trying to serve better. That's another thing that they like to see. Now, when I talk about partners, I'm talking about local partners, but also sometimes it's a good idea to have partners outside of Tigray. If you're doing something, a theme of like education or health or something like that, there are other organizations that might have done it longer than you that might know how to do, that might be experts on the theme, but not experts in Tigray. Those are people that you might want to partner with those organizations. Every opportunity is different, but sometimes it's a good idea to partner with an organization that might be a little bit better known than yours, might be somebody that the Department of State is going to see or USAID is going to see and say, oh, well, we know their work. That can be helpful. But you have to understand there's some organizations in DC and around the country and around the world, actually, that are just looking to pad their overhead or something with projects like this. Don't contribute to that. If they're looking for too much money, it's usually not worth it. Manage partners' expectations and manage your expectations of your partner. When you're talking to local partners, don't get their hopes up that a grant's going to be successful, that a proposal is going to be successful, because they would rather be pleasantly surprised than be disappointed. So if you think you have a great chance, tell them it's a good chance. If it's a good chance, tell them it's a fair chance. If you think it's a fair chance, tell them it's a long shot that you're going to win this grant. Don't make them think that they're going to win the grant if you don't have real good information that makes you think that you're going to win it. Manage your own expectations of what local partners are going to be able to accomplish. If you tell somebody this is a, $80,000 opportunity for your organization, they might promise you the world. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Hi.
If they're going to want to promise you the world for that $80,000. They might. If they are over promising, if they're saying we're going to do 6 programs and we're going to do all these training programs in a short period of time, and you're thinking, I'm not sure I can understand how you're going to pull this off, be upfront with them. Talk about alternate, approaches, something you can do. There's some people who look at a grant proposal and think, well, it's on them. If they said they can do it, that's their problem. If they can't, it's not. It's your problem. If you're on the grant, if you are at a step above that partner, then it's going to come down on you if they fail. So make sure you're scrutinizing what they say for whether or not you really think that they're going to be able to pull this off, and go ahead and ask them questions. It's better to hurt people's feelings or something like that than to set them up to fail. So these are things that you really want to consider with partners. Alignment with donor priorities. Sorry. Alignment with donor priorities. You have to realize in a grant opportunity and a funding opportunity, the funder creates the reality. You have to accept the reality that the funder creates to get the money. You have to accept their objectives as your objectives for the purposes of winning the grant. Don't argue critical points in your proposal, accept their things. And I have an example here. If the funder puts out a call for proposals to tackle the threat of recruitment into religious extremist groups, this is not a big threat in Tigray. I went to Ethiopia to study religious tolerance and religious intolerance. It's not a big threat in Ethiopia. It's not a big threat in Tigray. Although when I talked to somebody who I had worked with in counterterrorism before, I talked to them about Tigray. They told me they were worried that the conflict would create opportunities for Boko Haram to recruit. Boko Haram is not going to recruit from Tigray. It wouldn't be Boko Haram anyway. But if I talked to them about that, I corrected them about that because they didn't say, well, we have $200,000 to do a program to stop recruitment. If they say they have $200,000 to stop recruitment into religious organizations, describe how you can dissuade people from joining religious organizations or extremist organizations. Describe how your program is going to address the problem that they see, then do a baseline assessment to show them that that's not the problem, but do that after you get the money, after you get the funding, because then you come back to them and say, look, we were wrong. It's not actually recruitment into religious extremism. They're not going to cancel the program at that point. They'll still let you do whatever positive thing that you were going to do on the ground, but you will have corrected them in a way that you still get their money, even though they had a bad idea of what the problem was in the first place. So sometimes you have to do that with funders. It's a very common thing for a funder to come to you and say, this is the major problem, and you know the situation much better than they do, and you know that this is not the major problem. But you want to make sure that you get that money in so that you can do good things with it. So sometimes you have to sort of play that game. Monitoring evaluation. This is a big one. I could do a whole workshop on monitoring evaluation, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of points here. One thing is that you should be evaluating really everything that can be evaluated. Look at everything as an opportunity for evaluation. It won't always be, but look at the different components. You want to start with a baseline assessment to find out what the situation is on the ground before you start your project so you can gauge the effectiveness and the impact of it. Sometimes you can use existing data points to track progress. Like if you're doing something with education and truancy or kids going to school, you can say there's only a 10% enrollment rate now. We're trying to get up to 40%. Be careful though with any data point, because your project can have a good impact and have a negative impact on a data point. What I mean by that is, like, let's say we're talking about something about domestic violence, and you're building awareness about domestic violence. If you do that, and let's say there's already like a hotline system set up, if you do that and you do that effectively, then they're going to get more phone calls about domestic violence. It's going to look like your project caused this horrible crime to be committed over and over again. But in reality, what you've just done is made people more aware that there are resources that they can avail themselves of if they're a victim of domestic violence. So it's going to look like that spiked because you're, so you have to be able to monitor the data as it's coming in, so that you know if you have an indicator that's going to turn out to be counterintuitive or counterfactual. Make sure you stay on top of that. And when you're doing monitoring evaluation, pre and post surveys are a good way to just a basic measure of something. If you do a workshop, you know, ask them a few questions beforehand. What do you think about this aspect or that aspect, whatever the content of your workshop's going to be. Then afterwards, ask them similar questions to see if there's a change. That's how a lot of people do it. Focus groups are another way. This is a little bit easier. You get 4 or 5 people in a focus group, and you throw out some topics. With those, it's a little tricky. I mean, with both of those, you have to make sure that the person who's administering that measure is trained to do it. If they're not, then you have to simplify the measure so that they're not going to corrupt the data. When it comes to focus groups, it means you're just going to have fewer people in there, fewer topics for them to talk about. Make sure things are anonymous. That's an important thing. You don't want to have somebody's personal information in a survey, because then they're going to answer questions differently. Don't ask them for speculation. This happens a lot in monitoring evaluation, where you do a workshop and then after the workshop, you say, are you going to be able to use these skills back at your work or back in your community or back in your classroom, whoever you're training? You're asking them to predict if the skills are going to be practical. What they're going to do is they're going to think about whether they like the project or not, whether they like the workshop or whether they like your goals, and they're going to say yes or no, because you've just told them that what they're learning or what they're doing is going to be applicable back home, or else you wouldn't have put it in the workshop. So that's all you're really asking there. If you really want to find out if you're making an impact, you go back to them 6 months later, and instead of saying, did you use any of the skills? Because people will still say, oh, yeah, I use the skills. Instead of saying, did you, say, how did you use the skills? Make them tell you how they use them. Then you can really tell if what you gave them, if the skill sets that you gave them, or if the project you did has had an impact on their daily lives, is whether or not they can really articulate that they've been using the skill sets in the way that you taught them, or in sometimes it won't be the exact way that you taught them, but they will have adapted it to what they need. That's just as good. But you get that information by sort of not making it too on the nose, making them really tell you what they're doing with it. You also want to mix your methods when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. Everybody does the surveys and everything. When you're doing a survey, go beyond just the regular evaluation questions. You know, you'll have questionnaires that'll look like, you know, they'll say, you know, did you find it informative? Was the facilitator, did the facilitator do a good job? Did you like the use of the, you know, multimedia or whatever components were in the training workshop? Those are important questions, but also ask them about perceptions and opinions. Like, let's say it's a teacher training program. Ask the teachers ahead of time, you know, how important is it that every student in your classroom asks at least one question every day? Then ask them that after the workshop and see if that changes. That can tell you a lot about whether or not they really grasp what you were trying to give them, or whether or not it was really important for them to hear the training that you were providing. You can measure it a number of different ways, and it's a good idea to do so. But moving beyond just the surveys that people give at these things, you can create activities that are designed to monitor progress or to evaluate progress. You can, like, if you're doing, let's say it's a teacher training exercise, maybe a part of your workshop, day 3 of your 5-day workshop, is to create a lesson plan. When they create that lesson plan, that might be something that they can use, and then you move on to the next part of the training. But it's also a chance to monitor progress, to evaluate what you've done. You can you can create some way of evaluating, of assessing those lesson plans that can tell you if the training that you gave them on day 1 and day 2 actually found its way into their work when they created these lessons plans. There are a number of different activities, a number of different, components that you can put together in projects that have a functional use, but also they're a good way to evaluate how well what you're training or what you're providing or whatever it is, how well that's making an impact on the ground. Some key points about M&E: it should start at month 1 and it should run the entire project. M&E is something that is there. It's not just for funders, it's also for you. It helps you sharpen your skills. It helps you evaluate staff members and local partners. If there's an event that you can't be at to observe personally, it gives you material to use for fundraising, writing, reports, informing the field of practice. It gives you a way to contribute everything you learn from the project towards getting your name out there, getting the project out there, just really, raising the profile of your organization. You can use it for grants or proposals down the road, but you could also use that just to, talk to your donors, even your individual donors, about the work that you're doing and how important it is. If they're going to pay you to do monitoring and evaluation, take that opportunity to learn everything you can from a program that gets funded, because all of that's going to benefit you. The last thing I want to talk about is third-party evaluators. This has become something of an industry standard where they want at some point to see somebody that's not affiliated with your organization doing some of these evaluations, just to make sure that it's objective. This is a good practice. This is something that you should do whenever it's possible, but not just for your project, but for Tigray. Right now, Tigray needs to get to build an industry of third-party evaluators. They need to be available in every city. So take money from your funder and give it to somebody in Tigray that's doing a third-party evaluation, so you can build up that capacity, so you can have that capacity across the country. It's always a good practice to get money, to have people in Tigray doing things that you're going to need them to do over and over again, throughout the future. So it's a good chance to get some money into the community there. So I wanted to talk about budgets. This is just going to be an overview because everybody has their own budget format that you want to use. But these are some questions that you have to ask about your budget. The first one is, are you asking the funder to pay tourist prices? Are you asking them to pay a premium? Of course, renting a venue or getting a hotel, a lot of these things are going to cost more for an outsider than it would cost to somebody who lives there. But you want to make sure that you're not charging them the same rate that a mountain climber is going to pay who's coming from Europe or something like that. These are projects that are going to help the community. You want to make sure that the dollar is stretching as far as it can. Of course, you want to make sure that the money is going into the economy, but you want to make sure that people aren't overpaying, that the donor doesn't feel like they're overpaying for something. It happens a lot, and it's just something that you want to try to avoid if you can. Also ask yourself if the project can be replicated given the cost structure that you've sort of put together for it in the local environment, particularly if you're doing something like a training of trainers program where you're asking people from stage 1 to go out and conduct their own training workshops at stage 3 or something like that. You want to make sure that you are not doing a $50,000 training workshop that they're supposed to replicate at their own town for $200, whatever stipend you're going to give them to do it. Make sure that you're having realistic costs in the budget that's going to make it easy to replicate. Look at your budget and see what the most expensive items are and make sure they're worth it. don't spend a lot of money on something that's going to have a very limited impact on your budget. Scrap that and put it into more programs. Whenever I say that you should be reducing things in your budget, I don't mean that you should be saving the government money or saving the funder money. What I mean is that you should be taking that money and putting it into other program elements, building a better program, a more, impactful program. So if you see something that's taking up 30% of your budget for one-time event that's not going to have a lot of impact, consider scrapping that. But if you have to have it in there, make sure that you're using the whole thing. A lot of times, a lot of programs will have like a final ceremony where people get certificates or where you recognize the participants or something like that. Sometimes those cost a lot of money because you got to get hotels, you got to get people. Maybe it's a national or a regional project where you have to bring people in from all over Tigray into the capital to do this last thing. If you're spending a lot of money on it, make sure that you are getting everything out of it that you can. If you're doing a ceremony at the end, make sure that there are representatives from other donors there so you can be introducing the people that you've trained to new donors, that you can contribute to sustainability that way. Make sure that you're getting everybody together to talk about what the next steps are after the life of the grant. Conduct final evaluations in the last event of the program. Do those things. If it's going to cost a lot more money, just make sure that it's as valuable as you're spending money on. The travel budget is something that gets people in a lot of trouble. They'll look to see how much it costs to fly to Tigray, and then they will put that into the budget based on that cost. Maybe they'll pad it $100 or so, just in case there are fluctuations. And then when it comes time to actually do the project, maybe it got delayed 1 or 2 months, and so now you're traveling in a different season, and the prices have gone up dramatically, and now you can't travel. Now you have to draw in money from other parts of the program, or you have to take that money out of overhead or out of salaries or something like that. That can be a really bad situation because that figure that you're spending on travel can double or triple depending on what time of year it is, whether or not you're able to do 30 days. Sometimes things happen with the schedule where you don't have that much time. Just make sure you have enough money in there, and make sure you include everything: visas, travel to and from the airport, ground travel, and per diems. I put a link here that shows you what the per diems are for the country, for Ethiopia. I didn't just put the per diems because these change frequently, somewhat frequently. And you'll see in Addis Ababa, a hotel room, the per diem is $250. Now, I don't know where there's a $250 hotel room in Addis Ababa. If you can get a hotel for $50, it's okay to give people to under budget the per diems, to not go with their recommendation, because if you do that, then you have a number of people visiting for 5 days, and there goes half your budget because the per diem's so high. Make sure you don't squeeze anybody, though. If they're going to Ethiopia, if they're going to Tigray, make sure they have enough money to stay in some place that's comfortable and some place that's not going to be a distraction, that they're having to shop for places. If there's a lot of availability of hotels, if there's a lot of people staying in the hotels at that time, it's going to be more expensive. Make sure they have enough money, but you don't necessarily have to spend as much money as the per diem says you have to spend. Looking at the salary lines in your budget, you have to make sure that the salaries that you are paying make sense for a qualified person to do that. If you have somebody in Washington, D.C. managing the project, and you're saying that you're paying them $30,000 a year, the funder is going to look at that and think they must not be a very good program manager if you're only paying them $30,000 a year. Likewise, if you look in Tigray and you have somebody on the ground in Tigray and you're paying them $60,000 a year for doing the project, they're going to think this is a lot more money than the economy in Tigray would call for. It's something. There's a tendency, and I've been through this in every country that I've worked in, where you think you want to make sure you get these guys as much money as possible and put it into their salary so that you're really helping out. That's a dangerous practice. because it creates an expectation of that's what the salary is going to be. Then they can't work with anybody else because they don't want to get out of bed for less than $60,000 a year. This happened very famously in Uganda, where as soon as the Western money pulled out, which happens for long periods at a time, where you're just getting funding from local sources and everything. Once the Western organizations pulled out, nobody wanted to work for a lot less than they were used to getting paid for that 4 months that they were on the project that was funded by the UN or something. It can have a detrimental impact. But like I said before, if you're saving money through any of these means, don't make a proposal be that much less money. Put that extra money into more program elements, into things that are going to have a better impact, because some of these things, if you cut some costs on some of these elements, it means that instead of training 200 people, you can train 250 people, or instead of repairing a water system in 2 villages, you can do it in 4 villages. That's where you should be putting your money if you can save money there. Now, the salary lines, make sure that you're doing benefits and everything. I forgot to mention, make sure that you're adding benefits to that. And then the overhead is something that I don't put in here, but you want to think about. If you're getting money from the government, you want to have what's called a NICRA rate, which is when they look at what your indirect costs are and they tell you how much overhead you can have. Now, sometimes those can be pretty high, 20, 30%. In universities, they look at like 40, 50%, which is why you don't want to go with universities as partners often. But the NICRA is something that'll help you, that'll make sure that you know what your overhead is. If you don't have a NICRA rate, it's okay, but they will tell you probably 10% or 15% is what you can do for overhead. It'll be somewhere in the proposal that'll explain that. The last slide that I wanted to talk about here is how to review your own proposal. This is the most important thing, I think, to making sure your proposal is competitive, is that you are the first reviewer of your proposal. The people who review it for funding, you want to catch every single mistake, every single gap in your proposal. You want to catch that before the people with money catch it. So you want to attack your proposal. Figure out why it's not going to work. Figure out why it's not going to be funded, who's going to screw up, who's going to underperform. You figure all those things out and fix them before you send that proposal in to be judged by somebody who actually has the money to fund it. You want to make sure you do that. Scrutinize the budget. Like I said in the previous slide, look at all of those things. Really scrutinize the budget from the perspective of the funder. It's a good practice at the end of all of this to bottom line the budget. If you say that it's a training program, if you're training teachers and you're going to train 1,000 teachers in your program, and the cost of it's going to be whatever the cost of it's going to be, look at how much you're spending per teacher to train them, and think about whether or not a funder is willing to spend $2,500 to train a teacher, whether that's a justifiable expense or not. If it's not, then you have to sort of dial down some of the costs, or find a way to train more people. But really try to look at it from a number of different ways. It's a good idea to have somebody review the proposal that is familiar with what you're doing, is familiar with the area, familiar with the theme. They don't have to be an expert, but is not involved in writing the proposal. Somebody looking at it from the outside perspective. You want to make sure you can trust them, that they're not going to share the proposal with anybody else. You want to make sure, more importantly, that you can trust them to tell you if some part of your proposal doesn't make sense, or if the whole proposal is garbage. You want to make sure you can trust them to tell you, not somebody that's eager to tell you, because you'll find people that just want to tell you that it's garbage, and they're not giving an honest review. You'll find other people that refuse to tell you if something's garbage. You want to make sure that it's somebody that will tell you if it's not good, and compensate them somehow. You don't usually pay for something like this, but buy them dinner or something like that. Make it worth their while to really read it, to really give you good feedback on it. The last thing, just a small tip that a writer taught me, a fairly popular writer. I don't want to say their name, give away but when you're done with the proposal, to find a way to look at this with fresh eyes, which is what you need to do to see what the reviewer is going to see. Print it out in a font that you don't like. Whatever font that you hate, print it in that font, or put it in a document in that font if you're going to do an e-reader, if you're more environmentally conscious. That forces you to really read it again with a fresh set of eyes. It's something, it just tricks the brain. It helps you identify where you have problems or where there's gaps or where the proposal sort of goes off on a tangent. So you can read it and really evaluate it, because you want to be able to evaluate it before the people with money get their hands on it, because then it's too late to correct it. So that's basically what I have here. I think that's the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. I put together a packet of information that you're going to be able to look at. So you're going to be able to understand what I'm talking about by, looking at examples and everything. Please take a look at that, understanding, what we've learned in the workshop. Look at the materials. If you look at the materials and some of them don't make sense, feel free to reach out. Feel free to talk to me about what you have what you're not understanding, what doesn't make sense. Even if you go out to get a grant and then you have extra questions from that, please get a hold of me. I think yesterday she asked for emails. It would be great if you guys could put in Twitter handles or something so I can follow you if I'm not already. And then you can DM me, or you can send me an email, burbridgeduke at gmail.gov. So feel free to reach out. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'll throw it back to, wait, I'm sorry, I got this. I have everything on my screen now. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Duke. That was
Questions?
quite informational. You shared a lot of information. And as Duke has mentioned, we will be sharing the PDF of the slides via email. So if you have not shared your email address with us, please go ahead and share that with the host via chat. We'll also share the recordings with you. The recordings will be posted on the Tigray Communities Forum page. We'll send you an email once that's up. If you have any questions now, we can take time to answer some of those questions. If you'd like to put them in the chat, let us know. So far, you're getting a lot of thank yous, Duke, via chat, saying this is quite specific and informative and that everyone is appreciative of your time and efforts.
Oh, thank you for joining us. It's something that I've been meaning to do for a while. If you have questions that you'd rather email me or send me a DM, that's fine too. I'll always have time to answer questions.
Thank you. We appreciate you. And I'll leave the chat open for a minute so I can get some more emails so we can follow up with you. As Duke mentioned, he's putting together a resource folder as well. So once that's final, we'll share that with the slides and the recording so you all have something to refer to when it's time to get those proposals in. All right, so I'll stop the recording here. Thank you all again for joining. Thank you, Duke, for your time, your efforts, your contribution.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure. Thank
It's
you.
an honor. It's an honor to help.